Hey everyone, it's Shamrocked here with a boss guide for you. This is for Chrono-Lord Deios in the Murozond's Rise dungeon. Specifically, this is for A26 and it's on a Tyrannical, so it's basically the hardest that the boss will be, compared to Fortified. So this is actually a pretty good run. I think there's maybe a death that happens, but in like all things considered, this is pretty much as smooth as it will go for this kind of boss. So before we get into that, I just wanted to go over the talents that I used for this dungeon, and specifically for this boss. So keep in mind this week that the affixes are Raging and Storming. So, depending on the week, if it's Entangling or maybe Incorporeal or Afflicted, the talents on the left side might differ a little bit. But this is generally what I will go into a Murozond's Rise dungeon with. Some key things to point out is that I don't have Stone Skin Totem because the majority of damage in this dungeon, including trash, is magic damage, so Stone Skin is not going to help you out. Surprisingly, even the Horde Alliance boss, the battlefield boss, is also mostly nature damage for some reason, so it doesn't even really help out there, unfortunately. So the good thing, or like the good news, is that it actually frees up a talent point. So I actually have 2 points into Elemental Warding, which reduces all magic damage taken by 4%. As I said, this dungeon is pretty much all magic damage, so this will help you out, especially on a Tyrannical week, on higher Tyrannical keys, where some boss abilities will get you to, within an inch of your life. This will definitely help out. My flex talent for this dungeon is most likely Thunderous Paws. So I like Thunderous Paws in this dungeon because on Morchi, the battlefield boss, honestly the first boss, and then Deios as well, there are situations where you need sort of like a quick getaway, or it's just easier if you have a quick getaway. So you can use Thunderous Paws as like a quick, step out of Swirly, or move to this position. Or like, for instance, for Morchi, just like running away from the ads. Thunderous Paws can just be very useful for that. However, that being said, if you're someone who doesn't want to use Thunderous Paws, you could get rid of this, and I think the only other talent I would suggest using for this dungeon would probably be Earth Elemental for that extra defensive. So I believe, in my opinion, that's your flex point. However, just take this with a grain of salt. It is a starting point, so you can move these around as much as you want. This is sort of just like a template on how I would run the dungeon. Moving on to the right side for our spec talents, this is pretty much what I've been running all week. So I think all of this is pretty necessary to heal higher Tyrannical keys. I know Lauren's running a different build where I believe he's still using full points into Primordial Wave, which means you get rid of Mana Tide Totem, Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem, and Current Control. I've personally found that Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem has been like the MVP for me this season for Tyrannical bosses so far, just because we don't have our shocks anymore, so mana, and they did make changes to mana so that it's a little bit more taxing. It's something you actually have to think about now. So yeah, I find Mana Tide Totem as well as Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem together really help on that front. It basically just gives you an extra cooldown to use. I also have a point in Current Control, which reduces the cooldown of Healing Tide Totem by 30 seconds. This I find useful on bosses. It just lets you use, you're basically guaranteed a second use of Healing Tide Totem as long as you use it somewhat towards the first half of a fight. And then on super long fights, it actually basically guarantees you a third use if you're using it at the beginning of the fight. So don't underestimate this talent. Getting another use, getting a full another Healing Tide Totem can be pretty awesome on some boss fights. That being said, there's not really a boss fight in this and in Murozond's Rise that I feel like this is absolutely necessary. It's nice to have on the last boss because the last boss is pretty long, but other than that, I feel like this is your flex point on the side of the tree, so you could take this out. You could put it into Wavespeaker's Blessing, you could put it into Stormkeeper if you're looking for more DPS, you could put it into Ancestral Protection Totem if you want that handy on the fly B-res. It's really up to you, but I think in terms of flex points, this is probably the one that you're going to be moving around depending on what you want to do. Also, don't underestimate Flash Flood as well. Even having 1 point in here can be the difference between life and death for you or one of your party members. Alright, so with that explanation out of the way, let's move on to the boss. Alright, so this is a fairly long boss fight. I've actually slowed it down, and you can also see the ability tracker on the top left, so you can see what I'm casting and when. But expect this fight to take, on a higher key, maybe around 4.5 to 5 minutes. If you have a good DPS, maybe more around 4 minutes, but it's definitely going to be a long one. And it's very split up. Like the first phase is very, very different from the second phase in terms of like what you're going to be using to heal, so just keep that in mind. First thing to talk about obviously are the orbs, the infinity orbs. So I personally, as a healer, love to be the one controlling the orbs, just because it gives me a sense of control over the healing. I can, pop it or keep it out longer, depending on what cooldowns I have, depending on how filled my Cloudburst is, depending on where everyone is standing, like all of that stuff is stuff that you can factor in if you're controlling the orbs. That being said, if you're someone who really needs to focus on the healing and can't or don't want to do both, that's totally fine. Just make sure that whoever's doing it has good control over it. One thing to keep in mind about the orbs is that if you are if there is multiple range, like if you have 2 ranged DPS or an Augmentroker who counts as a ranged, if you have more than 2 ranged, then it basically means that the orb may not always spawn on top of you. So just make sure that is the case, that you are hanging around other ranged players so that you can go in and get that orb as soon as possible. Alright, so now the fight itself. So as you've been watching, hopefully, if you've been paying attention to the ability tracker and what I'm casting, I'm trying not to burn through my cooldowns in the first phase. I did use Ancestral Guidance because I know it's going to be up very soon because it's such a short cooldown. So I know I'll have it in phase 2, but I basically want to have everything in phase 2. So the only, based on the build that I showed earlier, the only cooldowns that I would use in phase 1 are Manatide Totem for that Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem talent. I would use Ancestral Guidance, and then I would probably use Healing Tide as well if things got a little bit hairy, because once again, I know it'll be up later in the second phase. I really want to keep Ascendance though. I want to keep Spirit Link. Spirit Link is kind of like your oh crap button in case anything goes wrong, or maybe if the tank gets really low from her breath, that's a really good option to press. So the only thing really to worry about in phase 1 other than the orbs are the magic debuffs that get put out. So depending on how fast your DPS are killing the orbs, or sorry, the ads, you may get 2 or 3 of these magic dispel debuffs out at the same time. If one goes on you and you have all your defensives, then I would suggest just keeping the debuff and popping your defensive and then saving your dispel for the next person who comes out. For me personally, I have Ancestral Shift, and then I also have Stone Form because I'm a dwarf. So, just use what you have at your disposal. Don't be afraid to health pot as well. It's really nice to save towards the second phase, but if you die in the first phase, then, you may not even get to the second phase. So don't forget about your health pot. And personally, I'm using the Potion of Withering Dreams because it's basically like a lay on hands on yourself. So that's really, like I said, the 2 things to worry about in phase 1 is the orb and the dispel. So as long as you have both of those covered, you're good. Once again, for the dispel, just make sure you let people know before the fight starts. If they get, I always say this, if you get stuck with the dispel debuff in phase 1 because like my dispel's on cooldown, make sure you save a defensive for that. There's really no other point in the fight to be using a defensive in phase 1 unless like they mess up and they're standing in sand, or they get hit by something, or if you're just not doing a great job with the orbs. So they should be able to save a cooldown for that. Most groups will lust in P2 once the dragon comes down, and I do agree with that. I think you want to get out of, you want to spend as little time in P2 as possible. And the name of the game of P2 is basically healing through the orbs, which, hopefully if you get through P1, you're used to that by now, but also sort of moving as a group and stutter stepping during these swirl phases. And if you stutter step and move as a group, you're going to have lots of room to play around in this whole area. It does look like a really big boss arena, but trust me, if you guys spread out and you're not paying attention, or if you move really quickly instead of stutter stepping, you are going to fill this room very quickly, and eventually the sand does go away, but it just makes it super awkward and a lot harder to heal. Going into P2, just throw everything you have at the wall. Basically, the spicy overlap that happens is you're going to get your first orb, which is going to explode. Usually that's totally fine to heal through, but then your second orb, the timing is always going to be that it's kind of coming down always as you need to move and as the group is taking AoE damage from the swirls that come down. So I always put my Cloudburst Totem down as the first orb comes out, and my healing from the first orb will basically fill that Cloudburst Totem. So that Cloudburst Totem is basically like your emergency eject button. So while you guys are running, you should have filled out that totem enough that if people start to get low and you're worried about anybody falling out or dying, you can just pop that Cloudburst Totem, and it will at least give them enough healing to keep them up while you run, so that you can heal them when you stop running. That's probably my best tip for this fight. Also, you'll notice someone died during the last run. That wasn't because of the damage or healing. That was actually just because they got hit by a swirl. So hopefully, it is very easy to get hit by a swirl, especially if you get trapped somewhere. So hopefully, you guys have a battle res if you're running this dungeon. But other than that, you'll see I'm just kind of cycling through my cooldowns. You always want to kind of, depending on the cooldown, you want to pop it at a specific time. So if you're using Ancestral Guidance, I would pop it basically while I'm healing that first orb and while my Cloudburst is down, because Ancestral Guidance is going to really super fill my Cloudburst, and then I can just pop that while we're running. If you're popping Healing Tide Totem, you should basically put that down as the second orb is exploding and as you're going to run. And the reason for that is it's going to heal you while you're running. Ascendance is something that you maybe, this one you can go either way with. You can pop it after the first orb goes off just to heal everybody up, and once again make sure your Cloudburst is down. Or what you could really do that is nice is pair Ascendance with Spirit Walker's Grace, which is the talent that allows you to move while you're casting. And then as you're running, if you have a Ascendance up, you're basically just, it's basically a free, nobody dies during this run phase. That being said, Spirit Walker's Grace, if you don't want to pair it with Ascendance, is obviously your other sort of mini cooldown to use while running. So don't forget about that. It's honestly, it was made for fights like this where you really need to go. Sometimes you'll get in a spot like you'll just see there where I had to run through the sand. If you don't have a personal to use while running through the sand, then make sure you have something like a health pod or just make sure you have a trick up your sleeve, maybe like a really nice Cloudburst filled while you're running past, because it would be really embarrassing to die while running through the sand. And then have your group die. So this we actually time with about 5 seconds left, so one more death and we wouldn't have timed it. So this is one of those dungeons too where the timer's tight. So every death counts. Just make sure you're considering that, and make sure you're really throwing everything you possibly have at this boss. And then yeah, you'll see I basically cycled through all of my cooldowns. I used Spirit Link. I didn't once we got into P2, I didn't really save it for an oh crap moment. I basically knew that the tank had a handle on this. Because he didn't have any issues with the breath throughout the whole fight, so I didn't need to save it for him. I just used it during an orb going out so that we would have more health while running for this swirl phase. And that's pretty much it. So just to summarize, the name of the game in P1 is to obviously have a good control of the orbs, whether it's you or somebody else doing it, and then to just manage the dispels properly. So if there's ever a time you can't dispel somebody or yourself, just make sure you or that somebody uses a personal. Going into P2, the tricks are to move together as a group, and then obviously, sorry, not obviously, but to just like after watching what I've done, hopefully you picked up that you should be popping down your Cloudburst, like dropping your Cloudburst totem down so that your healing from the first orb fills that Cloudburst, and then you're using that Cloudburst as well as hopefully on the heels of like whatever throughput cooldown you're using to heal through the phase where you're running around and getting through that second orb. And if you can master those two things, then you've basically mastered this boss, and hopefully your group is able to do the mechanics with you, because that will make it a lot easier. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this guide. I hope you got some tips from here and that they help you time this key and do this boss. This boss is not easy. If anybody tells you it's easy, they, I don't know. I honestly just don't believe them. I think this boss is one of the harder ones. It's a marathon fight. It's very long. There's a lot of damage going out. There's a lot of coordinated movement that needs to happen. So in my opinion, this is not an easy one to heal. But with that being said, it is doable with our kit. Very doable, in fact. This was, once again, a 26 Tyrannical, and yeah, very, very spicy, but very doable. So with all of that being said, I will see you next time, and thanks for watching.